So how many times have you lit an interview with the main goal of making it look good? Well, you may be missing a huge opportunity to affect your audience for the story of your film through finer decisions in your lighting. Let's check out the snippet from Patrick Moreau's Together workshop introducing the importance of lighting to affect your audience. For the full workshop, check out the link in the description.
We're going to dive into how our different decisions as it relates to an interview relate to how that is felt and kind of the story, but really just how do our decisions of camera height, of lighting, and even camera position relate to how the audience experiences what we create. I think a lot of times we don't realize how many decisions that we need to make in terms of, the aperture and the shutter speed and the white balance and the picture profile and the camera height and the focal length. And how close the camera is to somebody, and our key light and lighting ratio, and so many different things. And each one of us is kind of at a different place in terms of how much we understand all of those decisions and how much we make all of those decisions with intent, and which ones we kind of just go, well, I don't really know what this whole, aperture thing and how that relates to like this interview, so I maybe just kind of set it somewhere that works. But what we have to get is that whether or not you make the decision intentionally or not, it still says something to your viewer. You're still communicating something. And so we want to try and make as many decisions as we can with, what we're trying to say in mind. And ideally, you want to make as many decisions as you can with that specific piece in mind, because that's your value. Your value is in your decisions and your perspective, right? If Handel was to show up and shoot on auto white balance with auto exposure on a tripod, he's effectively replaced himself and become a tripod, right? And it does literally mean that a client could actually go, well, why don't I just buy the camera? Which a lot of people are doing now. Why don't I just buy a camera and just record? Like it gets me close, right? So we've got to get that, it's not the camera, it's the decisions you're making and why you're making them that are your value. And so that's where we start to dive into what these things mean, why they matter, and how you can make them with as much purpose as possible. Has anybody heard the saying, I feel like I've got a weight on my shoulders? What does that mean? In simple language, what does that mean?
Pressure. Weight.
Yeah. So it means like, give me an example. You're saying something like, I feel like I've got a weight on my shoulders. Just like something heavy or serious? Something really serious holding you down? It turns out that if you actually were to print your resume on really thick paper, you will be seen as a more serious candidate. Isn't that crazy? Just on the thickness of the paper, because we associate weight with seriousness. What about, I'm feeling blue. What does that mean?
Sad.
Yeah, you're feeling sad, right? Depressed, that kind of thing. Well, as it turns out, if you run your white balance cold, so that it's blue, it actually makes people feel like that coldness. In the same way, you can think about warmth, right? What color do we associate with warmth? Orange, red, right? Now, I just got this coffee, thank you, Des. It's warm, right? Now, the crazy thing happens when Ross came in the door, if I handed him this coffee and we walked in together, and then Max asked him how nice I am, he would actually think that I am warmer. He would rate me as being a nicer person. If your chairs are softer, you will actually feel like the room is more comfortable. So what we find is that there's a lot of things that actually affect our experience that we aren't aware of. And so we've got to get that as we make lighting decisions, as we make camera height, as we make all of these different decisions, it's not that anybody's ever going to recognize it as such. They're not going to go, oh my God, I love your use of the 50 millimeter 1.2 at a 1.4 aperture. That was so, effective at making me feel the emotion in that moment. But they will feel the effects of it. There's a very strong connection to the psychological feeling, the experience of your content. And light is a huge expression of that. And we need to get that, again, you never would have imagined that you think I'm nicer because you're carrying a warm cup of coffee, or that you would rate an interview candidate as being more serious because of the paper their resume was printed on. These things do have a strong effect, right? And so we have to be responsible for those decisions. We want to make them with intent as much as we can and get away from this is how I light an interview. I watched this YouTube tutorial, it's 3-point lighting. Are you in film school? Yeah. Yeah, so like fancy stuff like that. They'll teach you like 3-point lighting, and you're like, Ross will be like, great, I know 3-point lighting. Got to do an interview. Let's do 3-point lighting. The problem is that's not connected to what you're actually trying to do. It's just one way of doing things. So we want to try and throw a lot of that out and go, wait a minute, how can I create this in a way that is relevant? So we're going to start with light, and we're going to talk about breaking down light into its 4 main properties. There's actually only 4 different things that light does, and if we can become more aware of those, then we can just work through them as we actually set up an interview. So it's really quite simple. And this is where I'm going to pick on the live audience here. Give me one of the properties or qualities of light. If you're thinking about lighting an interview, and remember you need a microphone, if you are going to light an interview, what are some of the specific facets that you pay attention to? Give me one.
Temperature.
So temperature, we have the color of the light, which is generally how warm or how cool our image is. And that's measured by a Kelvin system, right? So what temperature is daylight?
5,600.
5,600 versus like 2,800 being like a tungsten lamp, right? And we can think of that being like really warm. Okay, so we've got one. Temperature. Color.
Intensity.
Intensity. What does intensity mean?
How much light is present
How much light is there?
or not present.
Right? Now, there's a misconception that a lot of us, when we think about intensity and lighting things, we think about, is there enough? Well, our cameras today can, see better than our eye can. So it's not about, is there enough light? Why does intensity actually matter? What is the main thing we need to pay attention to as it relates to intensity?
Distance.
No, sir. Anybody else? The distance relates to the intensity. And the distance is directly proportional not directly, there's the inverse square law, all of that kind of stuff, but it's related to the intensity. If I bring a light closer, it's going to be more intense. Yes, but as the filmmaker, what are we trying to pay attention to as it relates to the overall intensity?
Hardness versus softness.
That's another one. That's a whole other quality,
That's a whole other.
right? A bright light can be both soft and harsh, right? And a dim light can be both, they are actually independent. What we're thinking about with intensity is the balance, is the ratio. What happens when the ratio is way off? If we've got, one light that's really dim and one light that's really bright, say I'm interviewing Ross and then there's a really bright window behind him, what happens?
I get silhouetted. It's blown out behind me.
Yeah.
You can't see me.
Yeah. So if we don't have a proper balance of the intensity of our lights, then it can feel very rough and unproduced. And if we balance them right, then we can have something that can say a lot more, right? And we'll dive into that a little bit more. But the intensity is about the balance of lights, the balance of the light levels of all of the different lights. And you're seeing the ambient light, the practicals, and the lights you actually set up. Cool? So you've said the color, you've said the quality, how harsh or soft it is, and now we've said the intensity. There's one other factor that you really need to think about. Mike?
Direction?
Yes, the direction. Where is the light, right? Where are we actually setting it up? Now, we put these together into what we call the DISC model, which is really simple, but it just means direction, intensity, softness, and color. And we create an acronym out of it because I want to challenge you guys next time you go out and you shoot something to actually think about DISC. Because what happens for most of us is we pay attention to the color, but not really the direction. Or we pay attention to the softness, but not really the intensity. We don't actually work through all 4 of them. So what we want to try and do is think about this idea of DISC. And actually when you're shooting anything, B-roll or interview, go, wait a minute, is this the direction I want? Is the intensity, are the lights balanced? Is this softness the way I want it? And then what about the color? So let's just talk about each one briefly, and more importantly, why it relates to story, how that matters.
Was your mind blown with knowledge just like mine was? Check the links in the description for the full workshop, and remember to subscribe to get more mind-blowing nuggets from professional filmmakers. And do share what your takeaways were in the comment section below. Go ahead, I'll wait.